Hi, my name is Amitai Cohen. I'm a researcher from Wiz, and I'm going to be talking today about the cloud threat landscape and how we perceive threats to the cloud based on our research at Wiz. So first up, I'd like to talk a bit about the kind of research we do at Wiz, how we know what we know, and what we're trying to do about it. So Wiz Research is made up of a bunch of different researchers and analysts working in different domains. Our goal is to develop deep and very timely insights into security and operationalize them within Wiz, make them have impact within our product. We come from various backgrounds. Some of us are hackers, some of us have worked in reverse engineering, others come from a threat intelligence background, incident response. Some of us do vulnerability research, others do AI research, threat research. We work on a bunch of different areas. All of this sort of comes together to make the Wiz product what it is today. So a lot of our research is public. You can read about it in our blog. We talk about recent vulnerabilities. We talk about recent campaigns that we've identified. We do deep dives into how we understand various threats to the cloud. And we also talk about how you can defend yourselves against these types of threats. I very much invite you to check it out. As I mentioned before, parts of Wiz Research also do vulnerability research. Over the years, we've looked into various areas that we believe are of high concern, such as tenant isolation in cloud service providers. Recently, we've been looking into the security of AI as a service products as well. And in terms of what we're doing about this, a lot of this research is translated into very practical recommendations on how to avoid the same mistakes that our research has identified. So for example, I mentioned before tenant isolation. We devised a framework that we've called Peach that is meant to help you understand how to ensure tenant isolation in the cloud, whether you're a developer or a product manager or the consumer of these services, to let you know what sort of questions you should be asking your providers. And again, the goal here is to help others avoid the mistakes that we've identified in products over the years. Similarly, we also set up the website of the Open Cloud Vulnerability and Security Issue Database, also known as Cloud VulnDB. This is an open source community product that we at Wiz support. We host the website, but anyone in the community can contribute. The website shows you vulnerabilities related to cloud services that have been published over the years, and we rank them according to how severe we believe they are. The goal of this project is to allow people to understand what sort of vulnerabilities affect the cloud. And it also is very useful to understand commonalities between vulnerabilities. For example, we might find a vulnerability in product A, and another CSP has a similar vulnerability in product B. And it's very interesting to see the similarities there so that hopefully we can learn enough about how to prevent this in order to prevent the same vulnerability from happening in CSP C, for example. Another way we try to operationalize our knowledge and help people better understand the cloud is through CTFs that we've been setting up over the years. We've done CTFs on AI, we've done CTFs on Kubernetes, we've done CTF on identity, and on a bunch of other things. So please, again, check this out on our website. These are all ways that we believe that we can make the cloud safer by using what we learn from our own research. So having talked about that, let's talk a bit about how we perceive the cloud threat landscape today. Let's talk about who is actually targeting the cloud. So the first group that we're going to talk about is state-backed actors. These are actors that are funded and operated by states. Their goal is to conduct intelligence operations or destructive operations. Some of these names are probably familiar to you, such as APT29, perhaps Beach Sandstorm. These are groups, again, operated by states that operate both on-prem and in the cloud. The reason we're highlighting them here is that they have shown, they have proven themselves to be very adept at targeting cloud environments. And that's one of the reasons why we look into them and why we try to protect our customers from them. The second group is the cybercrime actors. These are mostly financially motivated actors. conducting ransomware operations, extortion operations, deploying crypto miners. Again, familiar names such as Scattered Spider, Black Cat, LAPSUS, Team TNT. These are groups that have over the years have been known to target cloud environments for financial gain through various means. And these are the types of actors that we also look into to try to understand what they're actually doing and how we can prevent them from succeeding in their goals. A lot of this research is documented on a public website called the Cloud Threat Landscape, threats.wiz.io. We document everything that we can find publicly about threats. We have nearly 300 incidents documented there, over 100 threat actors that have been targeting the cloud or potentially targeting the cloud. We document all of the techniques that they use and map them to MITRE ATT&CK. We document the various tools and malware that they use. And one thing that's a very interest to us is we also document which technologies are being targeted. So for instance, if we have a group that is known to target, let's say, Confluence or GitHub, then the reason that we'll document that is because it then helps us prioritize our own research in order to better protect, for example, Wiz customers using GitHub or Confluence. To make sure that we are properly identifying mistakes that our customers might make in configuring those technologies, for example, or we might encourage them to patch those technologies as fast as possible, just because we know that threat actors are constantly on the lookout for any weakness they can find in them. Just to give you a taste of what it looks like, this is where we document incidents and the actors that are behind them. Every actor is related to an incident. Every incident is related to a tool or a technique or a targeted technology involved. And you can pivot between all of these as you look in the website. Again, this is a public version of our own internal knowledge database. We make everything public that we can. Obviously, we also have a lot of things that we don't make public that are based on our own internal research, customer incidents, things like that, that obviously we don't make public. For every incident like this that we look into, we document a bunch of references that we think might be useful for others. We write up a quick summary of what happened in the incident. We document which tools were used, which technologies were targeted, and we often make a diagram to help people understand exactly how the incident took place. So just to show you what this kind of pivoting looks like and how it can be useful, this is the Cloud Threat Landscape website. We can see we have incidents, actors, techniques, tools, targeted technologies, defenses, which are the mitigations we offer against various techniques that threat actors are using. And let's take a look at a few examples. So I go into incidents, and then I can see here that there are a bunch of different incidents and campaigns that we've documented here by a bunch of different actors. You can see the various tools, techniques, and texts that they're targeting. You can see the incidents that they've been involved in. You can see various campaigns, supply chain attacks, cases where the threat actor's ultimate goal was resource hijacking, like cryptojacking, which is very prevalent in the cloud. And let's say you want to focus on a specific incident. So for example, we can look at Selenium Greed, which is an incident that Wiz discovered a few months ago, where a threat actor was targeting Selenium Grid for cryptojacking. We can see a quick summary here. We can see a link to the blog post where we spoke about this. We can see the targeted technology, and we can see the various techniques that the threat actor used. In this case, we don't know who they were. And then we can pivot on other actors and other incidents involving Selenium Grid misconfiguration abuse. So we click there, and then we can see here that there were 2 incidents in total, the one that I spoke about and another one discovered by another company. And then we can see here that that company found that the threat actor was using different tools in this case. For example, they were using gsocket and IP Royal. We can see what other threat actors have been observed using gsocket. So let's look at the Silent Bob crypto mining campaign. And then you can sort of pivot between tools, techniques, targeted technologies. And this is incredibly useful to learn more about the cloud threat landscape. And I highly invite you to check this out for yourself in order to learn more about various actors, learn their names, learn what they like to do, and pick your favorite threat actor and learn more about them, and then try to find them in your own environment. That's always fun. I mentioned before that we have actors that are definitely targeting the cloud and actors that are potentially targeting the cloud. So there are a lot of actors that are targeting the cloud let's say by chance. They're targeting the cloud and they don't really care that they're targeting the cloud. The cloud for them is just compute. So sometimes they hit a cloud machine, sometimes they hit a non-cloud machine. But there are threat actors that are very single-mindedly targeting the cloud, which are the ones that I've laid out here in a page called Cloud Fluent on the website. And you can check that out for yourself. Um, and a lot of these names should be familiar to you because they've gained a lot of notoriety over the years. And these are the threat actors that we're learning the most from on how cloud environments are actually being targeted. And we compare and contrast that to how we understand the cloud to be targetable. So by comparing the theoretical understanding and our threat modeling of how cloud services can be compromised, and contrasting that with how threat actors are actually targeting the cloud, that helps us prioritize the most in terms of our research and in terms of what we think customers should be doing, which is what I'm going to be talking about in the next section of this presentation. So just to give you an example of how that works, let's say we have LAPSUS, which is a group that a few years ago were targeting a bunch of tech companies, big names like Microsoft, Okta, NVIDIA, Samsung. They hijacked these companies' networks through various means. Sometimes they stole credentials, sometimes they allegedly paid off employees in order to give them their credentials. And then once they gained access to those companies, they stole information from them and either sold it or extorted them in exchange for money so that they wouldn't publish it online. They were very, very adept at targeting cloud environments. It turned out that they were basically teenagers originating in the UK and in South America, if I remember correctly. But they were very good at what they did. So what we do is we look into how an actor like Lapsus is actually targeting the cloud. So we take everything we know about them and we place it on a flowchart that looks like this. We understand how they gain initial access, for example, through compromised end users, as opposed to exploiting a vulnerability or a misconfiguration, for example. The next thing they do is they exploit internal apps. They steal secrets from those apps, for example, privileged applications within the internal environment, and then they use that for privilege escalation in order to move laterally within the environment. Finally, they reach resources that are of interest to them because they contain interesting data, such as trade secrets, IP, stuff like that, maybe customer data, and then they steal it. They also do a bunch of other interesting things. For example, one thing that they were known for was deleting administrator access to the environment, probably to make it take longer for them to restore access and figure out what lapses had actually done. Another interesting thing they did was they gained access to administrators' chat groups, and then they used that to understand the monetary value of what they should be extorting. So, for example, if they reached a certain database and then they saw the admin saying, oh no, they reached that database so-and-so, then obviously this is a clue for LAPSUS to say, okay, I'm guessing the information in this database is of special interest, so we should probably ask for a lot of money for that, which is pretty smart. So what we do then is we try to figure out how we can actually mitigate this. And there's nothing especially sophisticated about any of the things they're doing here. They're just really effective. They're really effective, basic things that they're doing that work really well, surprisingly well against very large and very advanced companies. And it turns out that the things that you need to do in order to protect yourself from this aren't especially sophisticated. You know, if you want to prevent initial access through compromised users, unless you're dealing with someone who's actually being paid to provide access, in most cases, you know, you're dealing with someone who just stole credentials through an info stealer, for example. And in that case, you know, having MFA saves you a lot of risk. It reduces the amount of risk by, I don't know, like 80%. Just by having secure authentication, you can make a lot of the things that threat actors are trying to do completely nullified. Similarly, if you have good secret management in place, you can achieve similar results. In terms of exploiting unpatched apps internally, if you have good patch management practices in place, if you have tools that can provide you context about the kind of things that are going on in your environment and help you prioritize what you should patch when, that also is very, very helpful. If you can devise your cloud architecture to be secure by design so that, for example, if someone gains access to one network, one subnet, they don't necessarily automatically gain access to everything else. That's also very helpful because it contains the blast radius of any incident. And obviously least privilege, which is hard to achieve, but when done well, can be very, very effective because it means that unless the threat actor actually manages to compromise a very privileged user, they are not going to get much success when they try to steal things from the environment. And most cloud incidents look more or less like this, right? There's nothing especially novel here, but the cloud does offer a few interesting attack vectors that don't necessarily exist elsewhere. And lateral movement obviously is a bit more complicated and needs to be adapted to the cloud. So whenever we look at a cloud incident, we look at what are the initial access vectors, how did they escalate their privilege, how did they move laterally, and what did they actually achieve? What was the actual impact of the incident in the organization? So when we look at the cloud threat landscape as a whole, when we look at the big picture, all of the incidents I mentioned before, we reach the conclusion that threat actors are mostly doing the same things over and over and over again, except for a few special cases. They're compromising end users because end users, it turns out, are often an easier access vector to the cloud than targeting the cloud directly. If you gain access to an employee's laptop, that can often be an easier way to access the cloud environment than targeting a server in the cloud directly, for example. They're exploiting misconfigurations and vulnerabilities on edge devices, on technologies that are considered sensitive in the cloud. From there, they're escalating their privileges and moving them laterally by exploiting all sorts of misconfigurations in IAM. We call this IAM acrobatics, just because it often involves a lot of creating resources, deleting resources, moving resources around, authorizing resources to get privileges they didn't have before. It kind of looks like an acrobatic show. When they gain access to compute, they abuse the IMDS service in order to steal privileges associated with compromised resources. And then from there, they move laterally and either steal data or hijack the resources for cryptojacking, for example. This is what we typically see in cloud environments. So again, threat actors are mostly using the same old techniques over and over again, which kind of goes to show that we need to invest much more heavily in implementing solutions that we know work, like MFA. I mentioned before that we have information about targeted technologies, and we use this to prioritize. So just to give you a taste of our information, so for example, we know that Docker is incredibly prevalent among cloud environments. It exists in nearly 90%, and we know that there are a lot of incidents and campaigns that have been targeting Docker. This puts Docker very high on our list of a technology that we feel we need to invest heavily in protecting. So we feel that if we could properly defend Docker, we'll either prevent threat actors that rely on Docker access from succeeding entirely, which is less likely, or we'll force them to move into other areas that we can also defend against, perhaps even better. So just, again, a lot of this information is available on our website. I do invite you to check it out. We rely on it to prioritize our own research. So by looking at the cloud threat landscape as a whole, focusing on the big picture, we can see several commonalities beyond targeting technologies, such as the most common techniques that threat actors are using across all of these campaigns. So in many, many campaigns, we see them using vulnerability exploitation. No surprise there. There are a lot of vulnerabilities in software, and people aren't really quick enough to patch. Secondly, we see them stealing credentials for apps. We see them abusing misconfigurations, often software misconfigurations, not necessarily cloud misconfigurations. We see them abusing the IMDS service when they gain access to compute. And we see them focusing on stealing cloud keys, because cloud keys are very, very valuable because they provide access to everything else in the cloud environment and they allow you to move laterally. Let's look at a few case studies. So again, vulnerability exploitation is incredibly prevalent among the campaigns that we've been monitoring. One notable example is Mango Sandstorm, an Iranian actor. They targeted both on-prem and cloud environments. Their goals appeared to be destruction and disruption. Based on what we know, based on what's been published about them, in this case by Microsoft, one of the ways that they gained access to cloud environments was by exploiting end-day vulnerabilities in apps on-prem and then moving laterally from on-prem to cloud. So this is an example of a threat actor that has been using vulnerability exploitation as an initial access vector. The next thing they did was they abused AD Connect in Azure by stealing privilege creds from the on-prem environment. They moved laterally to the cloud. They gained access to everything in the cloud environment that they could. And then at their chosen moment, they destroyed data both on-prem and cloud in the targeted organization to reach the highest level of impact that they could. And vulnerabilities have a very, very long half-life in the cloud. Our data shows that you can still see instances of very, let's say, relatively ancient things like Eternal Blue and Dirty Cow, Print Nightmare, Proxy Shell, Heartbleed. A lot of this stuff is still quite prevalent in the cloud. Fortunately, though, when you check the numbers, you can see that the number of instances of these vulnerabilities where they're actually exploitable externally by virtue of being on a publicly exposed machine is rather low. But if you have a threat actor who already has access to a cloud environment and they want to move laterally and exploit vulnerabilities on internal machines, then the attack surface here is still pretty severe, even for ancient vulnerabilities like Heartbleed. So the second thing we want to talk about is credential theft for applications. So one famous example recently is Midnight Blizzard. They were a threat actor attributed to Russia that targeted Microsoft and gained access to employee emails at Microsoft. And the way they gained access to Microsoft's environment initially was by using password spray, basically taking passwords that they assumed would be applicable to a bunch of users and just trying them over a period of several months at a rate that was low enough to not be detected. Eventually, they succeeded. They managed to gain access to an Azure user with high privileges and no MFA. Again, MFA, highly effective at preventing this kind of thing. From there, they moved laterally between tenants by using, again, IAM acrobatics. They created OAuth apps with high privileges, and they abused them to read email from employee mailboxes. So password spray, again, facilitated by stealing credentials. Credentials for password spray can originate from info stealer infections, from phishing attacks. Threat actors assign a lot of value to this thing, and that's why they try to collect them. Third thing we're going to talk about is misconfiguration abuse. This is one of the things we observed in a campaign that we call PyLoose, which is a fileless Python-based malware that was targeting cloud workloads for cryptojacking. So one of the ways that they gained access to cloud environments was by exploiting publicly exposed Jupyter notebooks. Jupyter notebooks can be easily misconfigured if you don't know what you're doing. And that misconfiguration is equivalent to an RCE vulnerability because it allows you to run code on the Jupyter Notebook instance and then exploit that compute for whatever reason you want. In this case, it was for cryptojacking. In another instance, it might have been used for lateral movement into the larger cloud environment. Cryptojacking, at the end of the day, just mostly costs you money if it's successful, but a threat actor that has been able to execute a cryptojacking attack could, in theory, just as easily have moved laterally into the environment and stolen things or conducted a ransomware attack. And that's why cryptojacking should definitely be taken seriously. And finally, we'll talk a bit about IMDS abuse and cloud key compromise. We'll talk about a campaign called Commando Cat. So Commando Cat from earlier this year was a typical but relatively advanced in terms of what they were doing, a hijacking campaign that focused on Docker. What they did was they gained access to publicly exposed Docker that was misconfigured to allow RCE, similar to the Jupyter Notebook scenario I mentioned before with PyLoose. They deployed a container and then they escaped the container to the host. And then the first thing they did was they stole cloud keys from the host by calling the IMDS service and by stealing cloud keys that were hosted in ClearText on the local storage. And from there, they applied a backdoor to the compute, and they deployed XMRig, which is a known crypto mining software, in order to mine cryptocurrency at the expense of the victim. So again, this is the kind of incident that shows that threat actors are highly focused on stealing cloud keys. Cloud keys can be anywhere. They can be accidentally exposed on websites that you're serving to your customers. Threat actors assign a lot of value to cloud keys. They're often observed trying to steal them. You can see a lot of tools that threat actors use that if you analyze them, you understand that the first thing they look for, again, is cloud keys. Um, Threat actors are often observed calling the IMDS service in order to steal compute-associated identities. And cloud keys provide threat actors with a sort of shortcut into the cloud environment because they allow them to avoid targeting end users and just immediately gain access to the cloud environment, assuming that the cloud environment doesn't have any defenses against that, such as requiring a VPN, for example, for access. So to summarize, the most common techniques we're observing in the cloud threat landscape these days is vulnerability exploitation, both to gain initial access and to escalate privileges once they gain access to the cloud environment, stealing credentials for apps, abusing both cloud and software misconfigurations, abusing the IMDS service in order to steal identities associated with compute, and focusing on stealing cloud keys in order to gain quick access to the cloud environment and assume roles within the cloud environment that have access to other interesting data or to administrative privileges. Our takeaways here, and again, there's nothing especially new here. It's just things that we need to invest much more in. We need to make sure that everybody is doing this. We need to make sure that these things are easily accessible for everyone that's using the cloud. MFA enforcement goes a very long way to mitigate a lot of the risks that I've spoken about today. Ensuring least privileges, vulnerability scanning and patch management while focusing on things that are of highest concern. For example, publicly exposed resources with high privileges. Secret scanning, you have a bunch of tools that are available today to help you with this. Secret scanning is something that threat actors are doing. You need to do it faster than them if you want to make sure that your secrets don't get exposed. And if they do get exposed, you should rotate them as fast as possible. And check your logs to see if they were used by threat actors. And finally, you should have software misconfiguration scanning in place, which is a relatively newer field, I think, just because software misconfigurations aren't as well enumerated as software vulnerabilities, which means that you kind of have to work a bit harder to figure out both what sort of problems even exist in software and how you should go about fixing them. This is another thing that we offer on the Cloud Threat Landscape website. We describe which software is being targeted by threat actors, which misconfigurations they're exploiting, and how you should go about fixing them. And one more thing I want to talk about today in regards to the cloud threat landscape is something that we've been calling cloud IOCs. So we recently put out a blog post about atomic cloud IOCs, which are specific cloud IOCs such as account IDs, container image names, IAM usernames. These are things that are, these are patterns that threat actors are often observed using that can be used to track their activity and identify them more easily when other detection methods fail. This is something that we feel that the industry needs to highlight a bit more. When you look at threat reports these days, most of the IOCs are either network or file-based, and that isn't as useful in the cloud as they are on-prem, just because in the cloud you're often going to see threat actors using VPNs, so IPs aren't necessarily useful. You're not necessarily going to see much malware. You're probably going to see a lot more living off the land, which means that domains aren't necessarily relevant as well, especially phishing, for example. You're not going to see compute in the cloud reaching out to phishing websites. And that's where cloud IOCs come in. You are going to see account IDs that you should be wary of because they are operated by threat actors. You are going to see container names being deployed in your environment that are known to be operated by threat actors and known to be associated with ransomware tools or with cryptojacking tools. You are going to see IAM usernames that are hard-coded in a lot of cloud exploitation toolkits. And by observing those IAM usernames, you know that a threat actor is trying to use one of those toolkits against your environment. So that was just one thing I wanted to add. So beyond all of the things I mentioned before, cloud IOCs are also important. We've actually been publishing cloud IOCs on GitHub. You can check it out by looking for the blog post I mentioned before. These are the examples of the cloud IOCs that we have today. Bucket names, user passwords, account IDs, ARNs. things that repeat themselves, patterns that you can look for in your cloud logs and in your cloud inventories in order to identify threats more easily. So beyond everything I mentioned before, ingest cloud IOCs. And that's it for me. Thank you very much for listening to this talk. If you'd like to check out our other work, please check out our blog. Go to threats.wiz.io to learn about the threats that we track. Go to peach.wiz.io if you're interested to learn more about tenant isolation and how to prevent those types of cloud vulnerabilities. CloudVulDB is where we document a lot of our cloud vulnerabilities and other companies' cloud vulnerabilities. And we also have a podcast called Crying Out Cloud, where we talk about cloud news, and we talk to people about the type of research they do when it comes to cloud security. And thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.